Welcome to the second module of Scientific Foundation of Stress. In today's session, we shall discuss the sources of stress, eustress and distress, and how stress can also be helpful for the individual. In the previous session, we discussed about the individuals responding differently to stress. We talked about internal and external factors affecting stress, and many of you may have wondered as to what these internal factors and these external factors are that actually affect you. Maybe you have also discussed and thought about it as to what are the stressors in your life, whether you would put it under internal factors, whether you would put it under external factors, and the obvious question next comes is, how do we deal with it? So today's session, we will take a look at stress in a more detailed way. We will talk about the related terms to stress, some very important terms that are linked with stress, and I have often been talking about it so far. And of course, after that, we will see how you can address stress in your daily lives. So, a relook at stress. So, we have been talking about a stressor for quite some time. A stressor is a stimulus with the potential of triggering the fight or flight response. That is, the stressor is a stimulus that could be internal or external. So, it could be when somebody tells me something abusing, that could be a stressor. So, that is going to induce some changes within me. So, in this case, the rebuking stimulus is an external source. It could be the increased heat in a packed auditorium. It is an external stressor. It could be again an internal stressor. I am feeling queasy, I am not okay. Now, this could be an internal stressor when I am going for another response. So, it could be, and this is inducing a stressful response, a physiological change. Now, the stressors can be biological and environmental. We spoke of toxins, that's heat and cold, and psychological, that could be, these are internal stressors, threat to self-esteem and depression. Sociological, so it could be financial loss, unemployment, bereavement, social isolation, and philosophical, that is loss of a purpose in life. Many of my students often tell me that I don't know why I am pursuing this course, why I am sitting for Ivy League college, or why I am appearing for an interview for a hi-fi company. Now, the reason is that these individuals are going through a loss of meaning in life. So, this by itself could be a stressor, and this could bring about several of the stress-induced reactions that we shall next speak about. Another very important stressor is guilt. Now, this is a very severe stressor. This is associated with behaving in a way contrary to one's moral framework. For example, lying, cheating, behaving sexually promiscuously in a situation where the individual's moral standards do not approve of that behavior. Now, this may cause immense stress to the individual and bring about a lot of stressful reactions. So, we have discussed about the external sources of stress, where we spoke about the sociological stresses and environmental stresses, and the internal source, where we are actually talking about the psychological and philosophical stresses that are coming from within the individual. A primary source of stress is the major life events and daily hassles that an individual faces regularly. We will talk about this a little later. I'll just remind you once again about Holmes and Rahe, who spoke about the life events as an important factor in inducing stress. Now, stress reactivity. Stress reactivity is the fight or flight response, or it is the response to the stressor. So, we have a stimuli which is actually inducing a response of the fight and flight. And what happens if you just go through this list, you will see that we are actually talking of the autonomic responses. So these occur immediately and these are related to bodily functions. So we have increased muscle tension, increased heart rate, elevation of the blood pressure, increased neural excitability, less saliva in the mouth causing dryness of mouth, increased perspiration, change in the respiratory rate, that is we breathe in fast. So actually we are restoring the oxygen content within the body to fight or flight. There is an increase in serum glucose, that is to increase the energy level within the body, increased release of hydrochloric acid in the stomach. Now this is one of the reasons where a long-term stressor causes ulcers. So you may have heard of peptic ulcers several times, where a person is suffering from perforations in the stomach wall. The reason is that during when a stressful situation is perceived by an individual, there is a secretion of HCl within the stomach, and because that is not being used by the individual to metabolize, what happens is that it causes perforations on the stomach wall and these ulcers come about. So when a person talks about having peptic ulcers, we must immediately think that there may be a stressor which is affecting this person for quite some time. There is a change in brain waves. Now when we talk of a person being in a relaxed state, there is an increase in alpha waves. But when the person is very alert, very stressed, he will be hypervigilant, and in hypervigilance you actually see that there is a reduction in the alpha waves compared to the beta waves, and there is increased urination. So what is happening is the sodium concentration within the body is kept to a higher level, so that the individual can actually respond adequately to the fight or flight situation. Now we talk about strain. Strain is the outcome of stress reactivity, that is to a long-term stressor. We have spoken of stress reactivity as the response to a stressor, and strain is the resultant. So that is, it's the effect of a stressor for a long time. It could even be one day. I'll give you an example, and this brings about certain changes within the individual. Now for example, if you had to sit in anticipation of a result throughout the day, you will notice that even without any movement throughout the day, just sitting on a chair or sitting in a quiet place for a long time, your body is extremely fatigued. You may have developed muscle aches and headache, and feeling extremely tired at the end of the day as compared to a day where you've actually had to run around a lot. Why is this happening? The reason is that when the body is anticipating a stress stimulus, say for example, I am waiting for my results to be released today, or I am waiting for the results of an interview to come out today, my muscles are tensed, and it is for being in this state for quite some time, the fists, the arms, the back of the neck, the shoulders, the back, the upper back, and in fact also the head, since the muscles are tightened, this after a prolonged period of time, this causes fatigue, and this actually induces an extreme exhaustion within the individual. Now imagine if you had to sit like this for 1 week, just apprehending the result. What would happen? It would bring about a lot of these physical, psychological and behavioral responses. In this case, let us talk about some examples of physical, psychological and behavioral responses to strain. Some of the physical responses would be tension, headaches and backaches resulting from excessive muscle tension. We spoke about it right now. Psychological responses would be the fear of being in a crowd. An example would be fear of being in a crowd resulting from contemplating the experience. For example, think about a person with social anxiety who feels that, oh God, if I am in a crowd, if somebody will say something to me, I won't be able to respond, or people may be looking at me. Now that is extremely stressful. Now the fear of this may actually make that individual avoid the situation. So just contemplating that situation is actually making that individual avoid the situation. Another example would be of an individual who has had a panic attack. What is a panic attack? A panic attack is actually where there is a sudden change in the autonomic arousal of the body. For example, we have all these symptoms of stress reactivity, or maybe some of the symptoms of stress reactivity. Now, this could happen for whatever reason. The next time, the individual fears that this may happen again, and this fear actually brings about another panic attack. So, this is one of the problems with contemplating the experience. Now, another example of behavioral strain is alcohol abuse and long-term alcohol abuse, where the individual gets into fights. Now, what is happening in this case is that the social inhibition and the emotional restraint of the individual is lost. The individual, even if he understands that this situation, I have to control my emotional expressions or my behavioral expressions, it may not happen that he is able to do it finally, and he may get into verbal fights or physical fights. Now here we will speak about the daily hassles. We've spoken already about the life events. Now daily hassles also increasing stress reactivity leads to strain. So we've spoken about major life events bringing about psychological experiences. Say if I've suddenly had a panic attack, then comprehending and contemplating the experience would bring about an attack. So that would be a psychological strain. Likewise, daily hassle could also bring about a stress and a strain in future. So it could actually develop into some illnesses. So in summary, stress speaks about other three elements, that is the stressor, the stress reactivity and the strain. Stressor is the stimulus, stress reactivity is the response to that stimulus, and strain is the outcome of the stress reactivity to that stimulus. Now the stresses for which our body was evolutionarily trained were threats to safety and survival. I'll give you an example. Imagine a caveman who sees a lion just outside his cave. How would he react to survive? He would require all the responses, autonomic responses, the physiological bodily changes that we have been talking about to either fight the lion or flee the situation. But does a modern man need to use such fight or flight responses in daily life? We have spoken about simians, and he said that our brain has not developed at this pace to adjust and accommodate to this century. We are not, so again I repeat this question, does a modern man need to use fight or flight in daily life? We are not talking of policemen and conmen. Think about you. Do you have to use a survival strategy in daily life? We need to occasionally. Say, think about you are trying to cross the road when there is a very fast car which is suddenly about to hit you. So immediately you jump back on the curb. what is happening to your body? Your body responded to the situation exactly like the caveman would do. Now again, a very important question brings us back to the life events and daily hassles. Now, do we actually have to go through such stressors every day? So think about the policeman. What would happen to him where his survival is at stake? If the body responds in the same way every day and there is a long-term stressor, then definitely there would be a strain following it. Now, our bodies have evolved to respond to stressors with an immediate action by altering their physiology for greater speed and strength. We have seen that in that example of you trying to get off the curb. Many times we see many individuals responding with alarming strength in a situation of crisis. Say a person who is not known to be very strong hits with a lot of force during an argument. But since these are not required every day, so when there is a symbolic stress, these stress products, that includes increased blood pressure, increased muscle contraction, serum cholesterol and secretions of HCl in stomach, they add up and they actually cause further illnesses and disease. If this was during our primitive stages, then these would be used up by the body to fight or flight. But since in symbolic stresses like a threat to self-esteem, a threat to any other psychological threat like depression, there we would not need to use these fight or flight responses, and because we do not need to change our physiology by responding with some action. So there these bodily products, these stress products get accumulated and causes a disease like psychosomatic illnesses. Then what does stress management do? Because daily hassles and life events and in fact symbolic stressors are a part of daily life. So how does stress management help you? Now, people who have learned stress management skills do not eliminate the stressor, but they often respond to the stressor in a similar way as another individual would do. But he would get back to his restored state or the previous state much earlier as compared to an individual who is not equipped with the stress management skills. That is, they would utilize their resources, use effective coping strategies to reduce the burden of stress. I'll give you an example. Think about a jogger who regularly traverses kilometers. Now, when he is jogging, he also has an increased heart rate, okay, as compared to a non-jogger like me who is jogging along with him. But definitely he will be able to continue for a longer time as compared to me who never jogs or never exercises, or and once he stops jogging, that elevated heart rate would come down to its normal much earlier than mine, where I would be constantly panting for breath. So a person who is equipped with stress management skills would be able to use these skills to deal with stress much better as compared to a person who is not. So now let us discuss a model of human stress that I've taken from Patel in 1991. She is given this model and she talks of an external stressor and internal values and needs that add up to the stressful stimuli. So that is, it adds up to how we are perceiving the stressful stimuli. Now, if my internal values tell me that this is a stressful situation, and this is of prior importance, of very important issue, then I will consider it much more stressful as compared to a person who does not think that this is very important. Now, the external, these combine to make the act of stress, or so induce stress. Now, it also, here we see the responses, two more important things. One is the coping resources and the external support. Now, even if an individual perceives a stimulus as stressful, it need not be that it will induce stress if he can actually resourcefully use his coping strategies and his external support. But if these two things are absent, the coping resources and the external support, or these don't add up to help him deal with the situation, then it will bring about an imbalance or stress. Now, we have the psychological response that can be divided into the emotional experience of the stress as well as the mental response. So, it could be something like, oh God, I can't deal with it, or the emotional experience of fear, and these bring about the physiological reactions. So, here we are talking of the autonomic responses like increased heart rate, muscle tension, etc., and the behavioral reactions of, say, it could be isolating self or getting angry, agitated, etc. And all these responses actually lead to the stress reaction. That is the final outcome. Now, how I have responded in this time, at this time, will also give a feedback to my response next time to the same stimulus or a similar stimulus. To give you an example, say if I was feeling really anxious during my interview this time and I did not attend the interview, the next time, that is, I thought that my coping resources, my knowledge and whatever support I have gathered from my friends and professors are not enough to deal with the stimuli, and I get so scared, and the response is, oh God, this is impossible to deal with, and because of the ANS responses, and I run away altogether. This feedback, this moving away from the situation, increasing the perceptual value of the stressor, will act as a feedback to the next time I go for an interview. So, it could be that in the next interview session, I will not face the interview at all, because I will remember that the previous time it was awful. Now, thus, it is very important to recognize our eustress and our distress. So, what is the way we have to break this model? So, somewhere we have to stop to deal with the stressors and stop ourselves from perceiving this stimulus, stress stimulus, as really an aggravating situation, so that the next time the feedback is not negative. So, we need to also realize that stress can be helpful. So, there is a part of the stress which is eustress and part of it which is distress. So, Hans Selye suggested that we need to recognize our own eustress, that is, when our body and mind is in balance. When we are not at balance, we saw that it causes stress. So, how do we know when we are in a situation of eustress? When we are feeling in a stimulus situation, when we are feeling energetic, adaptable, approachable and relaxed, this is a eustress. So, even though the stimulus is, there is a foreign stimulus, there is a new stimulus, be it external or internal, this is actually helping me to respond positively, adaptively. So, this is a eustress. But when we cross that boundary, that is when we feel exhausted, anxious, fretful, aggressive and defensive, that is the time when we are distressed. So that is the negative effect of stress. So we need to remember that every time stress is not bad. So if we just see this model, you see that performance is on the y axis and the stress level is on the x axis. So when there is too little stress, the performance is low. So if I just draw it for you, so think if there is too little stress, the performance is low, and if there is too high stress, then also the performance is low. So how do we know where our optimum stress lies? And Sally already spoke about it, but this is where we need to maintain our stress level. So if we have a stress level between O and O dash, then our performance is at its optimum. So again, if we go back to the PPT, you will see that too little stress causes less performance, and again too much stress brings about a breakdown. Say for example, if you are very less stressed about giving a presentation tomorrow, you will hardly prepare for it. If you are very stressed for giving the presentation tomorrow, then also your performance will be poor. So either ways your performance is poor. So when you have the lesser amount of stress, so that is when your stress level is less and it is between the optimum stress, between say this A and A dash, you will see that you are performing at the best. Now if it crosses the optimum, you will see that the exhaustion phase starts. So when your exhaustion, if you are in this phase, you will try to get it up higher. So you will move this way. So you will move this way to increase your performance to the optimum. And when it is higher up, so we try and move it this way. So I'll give you an example. Say if you are not studying, our friends actually do this for us. If you are not studying for an exam, your friends and family will tell you, why don't you know it's an exam and you have to work hard. But if you have you're really overburdened about an exam, people tell you that relax, this is not so tough, you will do well. So you have to understand your eustress and your distress to deal with the situation better. Now I'll just summarize our session today. So we spoke about the sources of stress with emphasis on stressor, stress reactivity and strain. We discussed the human models of stress and how it is important to maintain a balance by identifying eustress and distress, and we discussed the human performance curve and how stress can be useful. Thank you.